Hello, this is Lady Boulay, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. Thank you for your support. Thank you for subscribing to the channel. Thank you for your comments, and thank you for your thumbs up. Thank you for all you do to support the channel. And yes, we are commanded to love one another, whether we want to or not, or whether we agree with each other or not. And today, I'm asking the question, would Black Americans have fallen for the scam that went on in Minnesota that's got the Somalis in the hot seat? Let's talk about it. The recent Minnesota scandal involving a network of nonprofits accused of siphoning more than $250 million from federal meal programs has sparked a wave of commentary, confusion, and cultural finger pointing. Because many of the defendants come from Minnesota's Somali community, the public conversation quickly drifted away from policy and oversight and toward identity and culture. And I think that's very important. This wasn't just about the Somalis. This was about policy and oversight in Minnesota and in Washington, D.C. But beneath the noise lies a deeper, more revealing question. Would Black Americans have fallen for this? Not the fraud itself, but the system that allowed it. So let's unpack this carefully. This question isn't about guilt or innocence. It's about structure, access, and the way communities interact with government systems. It's about understanding how a scandal of this scale becomes possible and why it happened where it did. So to answer this question honestly, would Black Americans have fallen for this? We have to step back from the headlines and look at the architecture of opportunity. So y'all stay with me now, because I'm not gonna, I want to really look at this realistically, because I've been thinking about this. Would Black Americans have gotten caught up in something like this? Well, let's look at what happened that the Somalis got caught up in this. Minnesota is home to the largest Somali population in the United States. Over decades, that community built a dense network of nonprofits, daycares, community centers, and small businesses. These institutions weren't created for fraud. They were created for survival, mutual aid, and cultural continuity. But when the federal government opened a pipeline of emergency funding, the people closest to that pipeline were the ones already running community organizations. They had the infrastructure, they had the relationships, they had the paperwork systems, they had the trust of families. In other words, they had access. And access, not ethnicity, is the real engine of fraud. If a different community had been in that position, the story could have unfolded the same way. Would Black Americans have fallen for this? I ask the question again. To answer this question honestly, we have to separate individual behavior from collective behavior. So if we're just going to look at it from that standpoint, Black Americans don't operate collectively. We are more individual based. So it's possible that we may not have gotten caught up in this just because we don't have this collective mindset. Sometimes that collective mindset can be good and sometimes it cannot be so good. But let's continue, because are there individuals in our community that would fall for a scam if they had the opportunity and the access? They might would. Because we don't live in tribes and clans. We work together in different ways. We work together in the church of our choice, in the organization of our choice, In the things of our choice, we choose how we're going to work together. We don't just say we're just going to work together and this person's going to tell us what to do and everybody's got to fall in line and do it. We don't operate like that. So, if Black Americans have been the ones running the nonprofits, controlling the meal sites, and filing the reimbursement claims, then yes, some individuals might have done the same thing, not because of race, but because of opportunity. And the only question that I would ask is, did Black Americans get caught up in the PPP program? Did any Black Americans have to go to jail because of the Paycheck Protection Program? That's the only question you need to ask. Now, this is where what happened up there in Minnesota doesn't ring true to me. One of the most overlooked elements of this scandal is the state's hesitation to intervene early. According to court filings and internet and internal emails, some officials feared that investigating a minority led nonprofit could be interpreted as discriminatory. Now, I don't buy that. That fear created a vacuum, and in that vacuum, the alleged fraud grew. This is a critical lesson. Oversight is not oppression, oversight is protection. It protects taxpayers. It also protects communities from being stereotyped, scapegoated, or collectively blamed for the actions of a few. When oversight fails, the narrative shifts from a few individuals committed fraud to this community is corrupt. And that shift harms everyone. And that's what happened up there with the Somalis. All of those Somali people were not involved in that scamming. But they're saying that the reason they didn't do anything about it is because they feared that investigating this minority led nonprofit could be interpreted as discriminatory. I don't buy that. I don't buy that. You mean to tell me you know something is going wrong in your state or in your city and you're not going to do anything about it because you think somebody's going to say it's discriminatory? I don't buy that. I don't buy that. So the bigger story is the Minnesota scandal is not a story about Somalis. It's not a story about immigrants. It is not a story about Black Americans. It's a story about systems and what happens when those systems are stretched, stressed, and stripped of accountability. When a system is broken, whoever has access will exploit it. That's not cultural, that's human. Okay, now that's what they're saying now. All the Somalis had all this access. All the Somalis had all this opportunity. So they just stepped in and just started, taking money. I still don't buy that. Why would they let a group of refugees from Africa walk away with millions, maybe billions of dollars? So this is what I got back. During COVID, the federal government changed the rules for child nutrition programs because remember, this is about feeding the future program. So they had no site visits, no in person verification, no meal counting audits, no documentation requirements, and no proof of children served. The entire system switched to honor based reimbursement. I've never heard of that before in my life. If a nonprofit submitted a claim saying, we served 5,000 meals today, the state was required to pay it without checking. Do y'all believe that? Well, if they did, then we can see the weakness in the program in Minnesota. Because anybody they could have said they were serving 15,000 and they still would have had to pay for it because there was no oversight. That's what they're claiming. I was glad to discover that there were members in the Minnesota State Department who knew something was wrong with that, paying out all that money to these programs without any oversight. And because the state pushed back on paying them, this so called Feeding Our Future sued them. And a judge ruled that they had to keep paying because the state didn't follow the exact administrative procedure for stopping payment. So the court forced the state to continue reimbursing the nonprofits. Now, this was not about fear of racism like they claim it was. This was because bureaucracy was overpowering their common sense. In other words, they had lazy paperwork and they had political appointments who wanted to keep those programs going to pacify perhaps the Somali community because they wanted the votes. So that's what it comes down to. They got that money because the state did not follow through on what they were supposed to be doing. So need to stop telling that lie about they didn't want to be called racist, because since when didn't they want to be called racist? All right, anyway, so y'all, the question is, would Black Americans have fallen for this? Would Black Americans have done this if they had access and opportunity to get $250 million? You let me know in the comment section. Thank you for listening. Have a good day.